My name is Dr. Scott Chadwick, and I will be talking to you about forensic science. So first of all, what is forensic science? Well, forensic science relates to the use of science and the scientific method in order to assist in the investigation of crime. Now, we use forensic science throughout the entire investigation process. So this involves first a crime scene investigator attending the scene, and it's their role to collect any relevant pieces of evidence. And in forensic science, we call the pieces of evidence that people collect and analyze as forensic traces. So that's what I'll be referring to for the rest of the talk today. So we use these traces throughout the entire process. So once our crime scene investigators have collected these forensic traces, they will then send those traces to be analysed by forensic scientists in the laboratory. And their role is to try and establish a link between an offender and a victim, or a victim and the crime scene, or the offender and a crime scene. And they'll use that using scientific instruments and scientific techniques. Then the final step of the forensic science process is for the forensic scientists to present their evidence in court, because we are obviously trying to assist the legal system in the investigation of crime. So that final step is for us to give our expert opinion to the jury or the judge in order to help them make a decision. Now, a really nice way for you to think about forensic science is as a historical science. So if you think about things like archaeology and paleontology, well, they use things like fossils and relics to try and understand what happened hundreds or thousands of years ago. And that's the same goal that we're trying to do in forensic science. We're using these traces to try and understand what happened not hundreds of thousands of years ago, but mere days or even hours. And our goal is to try and recreate or understand what happened during the event of a crime. So the role of forensic science is broken down into these three main sections. Now, at the bottom of our diagram, I've already kind of spoken about the investigation and the judicial system. So focusing on a single case and trying to make those connections between individuals for the purposes of a conviction. But the sort of third dimension to forensic science is this area that we call forensic intelligence. Now, this is where we use information and data to try and better understand crime with the goal of hopefully preventing it or disrupting that criminal behaviour. Now, for example, if we have a situation where there are a lot of burglaries that are occurring in the same area, what a forensic scientist can do is they can first start to look at all the individual cases and see if there are any common traces between them. So there might be the same fingerprint that's occurred across two crime scenes. It might be the same shoe mark that's occurred that we've identified. And through that, we're able to link or connect cases. So we're not just focusing on one case, we're focusing on a larger group of cases. Another way that we can use forensic intelligence is through the use of data. So if we're finding that the crimes are all occurring in a particular area or location, we can take that information and give that to the police so that they can divert some resources to help prevent those crimes. So they might put some extra police patrols in that particular area on certain days or at certain times. And it's through this information that we gather from crime that we can hopefully try to prevent it from occurring, or at least disrupt it with the hopes of potentially stopping it completely. So when we think about forensic science, I've already sort of spoken about how it's all about making connections or making links. And the three links that we want to make is between an offender and a victim, or an offender and a crime scene, or the victim and the offender, or the victim and the crime scene. Now, traditionally in forensics, we've relied on physical traces. So these are things like fingerprints, DNA, or a body or skeletal remains. And this has sort of been essential to forensic science for, the last 100 or so years. But as our technology has improved, we've actually seen a shift from these ideas of physical traces and a physical crime scene, and things are moving more into the online or digital space. So when we look to the future, the forensic science that we have been using can also be applied to the digital and online world. So an example is, maybe 10, 15 years ago, if there was a robbery that occurred, you had to have an individual actually be physically in the building or in the house to be able to steal someone's, money or belongings. But now with the development of online banking or online shopping, more and more of our information is being put online, and you can have people's identity or money be stolen from somebody who isn't even in the same country as them. So we need to not be looking for these physical traces anymore, but we also need to be thinking about these digital traces. So what are some examples of these digital traces that we can use to try and connect or make the links between an offender, a victim, and the digital crime scene? Well, these are things like our emails. It could be our GPS data from our mobile phones, or it could just be our mobile phones themselves. They have a whole wealth of information. It's got all of our social media, it's got our online banking apps in there. So we can use all of that information and data to try and make the links that we would generally make if it was a physical crime scene. So the future of forensic science is really in the combination of these two areas of the digital and the physical world coming together. And when we think about forensic science, I've been talking about this idea of the trace. And forensic science, the definition of a trace refers to a remnant of a past activity or person. And that's kind of what we're trying to study here. And it doesn't matter what it is, the sort of fundamentals are all the same. Now, this diagram is really just trying to show you the really overlapping nature of forensic science. So on the left-hand side there, we've got our different disciplines that feed into forensic science. So things like chemistry, physics, biology. And if we take an example of one of these areas, let's say the drugs and forensic toxicology area. Now, in order to have a good understanding of drugs and forensic toxicology, we might need some aspects of chemistry. Chemistry is going to help us understand how drugs are going to be made or manufactured. The biology is going to help us to understand how drugs interact with the body and how people might be adversely affected by taking different drugs. And even the IT and computing areas. Now, a big area of the dark web is the sale of illicit drugs. So using our digital forensic skills or the IT and computing knowledge, we can apply that to getting a better understanding of how drugs are sold online. And that's just one example of how these underlying disciplines sort of feed into our forensic areas. And we can see that everything's going to be overlapping with each other. It is not a very isolated discipline. Everything feeds into each group. And our ultimate goal is for these different areas to come together to try and help us solve a crime. And in terms of who this is helpful for, now I've already spoken about the criminal justice and the forensic laboratories, but we also, forensic scientists are also very helpful in the areas of security and defense. So our border controls or the national defense forces, we can use forensic scientists to help them. The public health and public policy. So again, in the areas of, for instance, drugs and toxicology, getting an understanding of how drugs are impacting people's health can help inform the public health sector to help people with the treatment of drug overdoses or drug rehabilitation. But it can also help policy. So if there are new drugs coming on the market, we can inform lawmakers that the laws should be updated to include these new areas that are causing concern. So even though we tend to think forensic science is just the crime scene or just the lab work, it is actually a more wider reaching area of science that overlaps with a whole range of other disciplines. So what jobs do forensic scientists graduates do and who employs them? Well, the sort of main area is in the area of law enforcement. So a lot of state and federal policing agencies, so they will hire a lot of our graduates, either in the areas of the crime scene investigation, but also in the area of their laboratory work, or even their lab and data analysis. So in particular, the more defense areas. The good thing about the forensic science programs is that they do provide you with an underlying scientific skill set. So people or graduates are able to get employed in regular science laboratories. So for instance, in Australia, we have our Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation and our Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. So we've had graduates move into those areas. In particular, if we have graduates that are looking in the biology area, they can work for pathology or hospitals to help them with their biological samples to be analysed. Because we have a focus on forensic intelligence, the intelligence agencies in different countries as well, we find that our forensic scientists are a natural fit for those sorts of intelligence organisations. There are two other areas. So there are areas of private forensic agencies and also in cybersecurity firms. So in particular, those digital forensic graduates would be looking into those cybersecurity firms. To give you an understanding of what we do here at UTS, UTS has what we call the Centre for Forensic Science. Now, the advantage of being the first forensic science program in Australia is that we've had quite a lot of time to develop different areas of expertise. So here are just some examples of the areas where our academics are researching in. So we have quite a lot of researchers working in the areas of fingerprint detection and DNA profiling. We've got an area looking at forensic taphonomy, which is the investigation of human remains, or getting a better understanding of how human remains decompose over time, so we can help investigators establish a time of death. I've already spoken quite a bit about forensic intelligence and drugs and toxicology, so we have quite a few academics researching in those areas. And then down the bottom there, we've got academics looking at digital forensics and crime scenes, so helping to come up with more improved methods for the detection of digital traces and also recovering more traces from the crime scene. There's an area that's really growing interest. It's called investigative genetics. And this is if we have a DNA profile of someone, but we can't make an identification, what other information can we get from them? Can we establish their genetic background? Can we do a facial mapping from their DNA? So this is a kind of where DNA is moving in the next 5 to 10 years, being able to get some extra information from that DNA profile. And then linked to that drugs and toxicology area is getting an understanding of these new psychoactive substances. So as more drugs come onto the market, trying to understand what effects they have so that we can better help investigators identify them. So thank you for listening. And if you do have any questions or you would like further information, please feel free to email science.international@uts.edu.au. So thank you. All right, so I'm just going to do another round in case that one's maybe too long or there was some stuff up. So I will start sharing screen now. Cool. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Chadwick and I will be talking to you about forensic science. So first of all, what is forensic science? Well, forensic science is the use of science and the scientific method to investigate crime. So our goal is to help investigators using our scientific methods and techniques to get a better understanding of what happened during the events of a crime. Now, the way that we do that is through the study of traces. Now, traces are a term that we use in forensics, which just refers to a remnant of a past activity or of a person. So I'm going to be using that term quite a bit. So that's kind of what. Oh. All right, that was terrible. So I'm just going to restart that one. I really feel sorry for you having to listen to this. All right, take 3. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Chadwick and I will be talking to you about forensic science. So first of all, what is forensic science? Well, forensic science is the use of scientific methods in the assistance of... Nope, starting again. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Chadwick and I will be talking to you about forensic science. So first of all, what is forensic science? Well, forensic science relates to the use of science and the scientific method to assist in the investigation of crime. Now, forensic science is a very broad area that covers a whole range of different disciplines, and I'll go through some of those disciplines a bit later in the talk. Now, we use forensic science throughout the entire investigation process. So starting from when a crime is reported, we will have forensic scientists attend the crime scene. And their goal is to try and collect as much evidence that they feel is going to be helpful for the investigators to try and make a link between the victim and the offender, or trying to understand what has happened during that crime. Once that evidence has been collected, it will then get sent to the laboratory to be analysed by another forensic scientist. And their job is to try and potentially identify what that evidence is or who that evidence belongs to. And then finally, forensic scientists will go to court and present their findings to help the jury or the judge make a decision about a particular person's guilt in that case. Now, a really nice way for you to think about forensic science is a historical science. So if we think about things like archaeology and paleontology, well, they're using fossils and relics to try and understand what has happened hundreds or thousands of years ago. And forensic scientists are trying to do the same thing. We are collecting these traces or these pieces of evidence to try and understand what has happened, not hundreds or thousands of years ago, but mere days or hours ago. And we want to try and recreate what has happened through these forensic traces. Now, forensic science can be broken down into 3 sub areas. Now, I've already spoken a bit about the investigation and the judicial system. So this is where we are focusing on a single case to try and establish who had done it and bring a criminal to justice. But there is also a 3rd dimension to forensic science, and this is the area of forensic intelligence. So when crimes are occurring, we can use information and data from each of these crimes to try and prevent them from occurring in the future or disrupting that pattern of criminal behavior. So for instance, if we have a whole lot of burglaries that are occurring in a particular area. Forensic scientists can use forensic intelligence to start to make links or connections between the cases. So they might look at fingerprints between the different crime scenes. They might also look at different shoe prints and seeing if they're belonging to the same person. And through that, rather than it just being one case, it actually starts to connect up to be multiple cases. Another way that we can use forensic intelligence is if we know that crimes are occurring in a particular area or at a particular time, we can feed this information to police so that they can divert their resources to try and prevent the crimes from occurring in the first place. So they might put extra police on patrol in that particular area to try and disrupt and stop that crime from occurring in the future. So forensic science isn't just the stock standard single investigation, it is also more holistic in trying to prevent crime from occurring. So I've already mentioned that when we've got crime scene officers attending the crime scene, they're collecting these traces or these pieces of evidence. And the reason why they're doing this is that they're trying to make a connection. This connection is important because it's trying to help us understand what has happened. Now, these connections could be between an offender and the victim, or the offender and the crime scene to try and put that person at that crime scene during the time of the crime. Or it could be between the victim and the offender, or the victim and the physical crime scene. Now, things that we would be looking for would be things like our fingerprints, DNA, if there's any remains of a body. These are all things that we can use to make these connections. But if we have a think about it, the types of crimes that are occurring have changed quite rapidly in the last 10 to 15 years. And this has happened because more and more our lives are going online. So just like we had our physical traces that we're looking for, there is also this digital dimension to forensic science now. So how we can think about this is 10 to 15 years ago, if there was a robbery, there had to be a person going to a bank or going to somebody's house and stealing a physical item. It could be, jewelry, it could be money. And we would be looking for, traces of DNA or fingerprints to try and put that offender at that crime scene. But now with the rise of online banking and online shopping, the person who steals person's money doesn't need to even be in the same country as the victim. So it becomes a lot more difficult for us to try and make these connections with physical traces. So we need to look at these digital traces. Now, these could be things like emails, it could be GPS data, or it could be just a person's mobile phone, because that's going to have a lot of information about who that person is and who they've dealt with. And so really the future of forensic science is in this combination of the digital and physical world and trying to better understand how they can work together to help stop and prevent crime from occurring. So forensic science is really focused on this idea of the trace. So even though we talk about, DNA, fingerprints, emails, mobile data, human remains, they're all what we would call a trace, because we apply the same basic principles to each of these different types of evidence. And we can see why we do this, because the understanding of forensic science is not just a single area, it's actually an overlap of many different disciplines and areas. So for instance, if you look on the left-hand side of our diagram here, in order to better understand forensics, we need to have some understanding of chemistry, maths, physics, biology, IT, law, and the social sciences. And these feed into our different disciplines in forensics. So for instance, in the area of drugs and forensic toxicology, If we want to understand how drugs are made and how clandestine labs are making these drugs, well, we need to have an understanding of chemistry. Now, if we want to understand how the drugs are interacting with people's bodies and how what are the negative effects of taking these drugs, well, we're going to have to understand some biology. If we want to understand how drugs are being sold on the dark web, well, we'll need to have some understanding of IT and computing. We'd have to go onto online forums. So you can see how within our areas of forensic science, there is these overlapping areas that are coming from our enabling disciplines. And because forensic science is such a multidisciplinary area, who we report to or who engages with forensic science is actually also quite diverse. So we do have our criminal justice, the courts, the police areas, and traditional laboratories, but we always got the areas of security and defense. So we've got cybersecurity, we've got the defense forces. They all have some investment in understanding forensics. Public health and public policy. So again, with the example of drugs and toxicology, if there are new drugs that are coming on the market, how does it affect people? Well, this is obviously helpful for the public health sector so that we can help treat overdoses or addiction. If there are new drugs that are problematic and we need to influence policy or legislation, well, forensic scientists are obviously going to be trying to provide as much information to the people that make laws and policy. So we can see here that, again, when we think about forensics, it might be a very traditional investigation side of things, but it is quite multidisciplinary, and there is a whole range of areas that forensic scientists can move into. And this is reflected in the jobs that our graduates will get. So a lot of them will move into law enforcement and policing agencies in a few range of different roles. We have a lot moving into laboratories. So just general lab work, pathology, hospital scientists, those sorts of things. Because they have an understanding of intelligence, a lot of intelligence and criminal prevention or crime commission agencies will employ forensic graduates. And in the area of the digital forensics, there is a lot of cybersecurity firms that are hiring forensic graduates because they have an understanding of the threats and also how to prevent those threats from occurring. So at UTS, we have the Centre for Forensic Science. Now, the advantage of being the first forensic science program in Australia is that over time, we've been able to develop a fairly diverse range of research areas. And we have academics that are world-leading academics in each of the areas that we have here. So fingerprint detection, DNA profiling, detection of explosives and gunshot residues, forensic taphonomy, which is the study of human decomposition and human remains. So at UTS, we have the Centre for the Study of Human Decomposition. It's the first in the Southern Hemisphere. We have researchers looking into forensic intelligence, drugs and toxicology, and those new psychoactive substances. We've got researchers looking into digital forensics and crime scene sciences, so how we can better detect and understand the digital and crime scene areas so that we can get a better result at the end of the day. We've also got a really interesting area that looks into investigative genetics. Now, this is where if we have a DNA profile for someone, but we're not able to identify them, what other information can we get from them? Are we able to determine their genetic background? Are we able to get a facial profile from their DNA? So using that sort of next level of information to try and help police in their investigations. So thank you for listening, and if you do have any further information or questions, please feel free to use the email listed here. Thank you for listening.